Welcome to Sleep with Myth. Close your eyes and let the world fade away. Tonight we drift beyond time, where gods dream and stories remember their light. Before it happened, the city kept time like a garden keeps bees. Every hour had its own bell. Every bell wore its own weather. Bakers opened with the first chime of bronze. Fishermen set out at the second. And by the ninth, shutters lifted in a hush of wood, as though the streets themselves were blinking awake. Astor was the city's horologist, keeper of hands and minutes, listener to springs. He could hear a tired escapement across a square, could smell old oil the way a sailor smells rain. People brought him their clocks as if they were ill children. He returned them as if they had learned to breathe. At the top of the hill stood the Meridian Tower, where the great bell counted noon. It had never missed its note in 100 years. On the morning the world changed, the bell drew breath, one bright inhalation, and then forgot how to let it go. The sound hung in the air like a bird that refused to decide between wing and sky. Time did not shatter. It simply chose a single step and stood there, like a dancer remembering the first lesson. Clouds paused mid-drift. Steam curled and did not fade. A child's rubber ball rode the air an inch above a cobble and waited politely. Astor's pendulums, 1,000 patient swings in 1,000 clocks, reached their far edge and stayed, as if all the world were holding itself between one heartbeat and the next. He felt it before he saw it. The city's rhythm thinned, then became a single thread, then a single bead on that thread, round and still. He touched the nearest clock. Its tick had become a syllable trapped on a tongue. In the quiet, other sounds appeared. The soft seam of his own breath, the inside of his bones humming, a gull suspended above the harbor, wings open like a question. Across the plaza, the fountain reached upward and did not fall, glass frozen into the shape of yearning. Astor whispered, out of habit rather than need, easy now. But there was no now for the word to land in. The old ones had told parables, that somewhere above the firmament, the gods kept a clock that did not measure hours, but promises. When it stopped, they said, the world would not end. It would remember. Children laughed at the story. So did Astor, until he found that laughter required momentum, and momentum was a currency nobody carried anymore. He left his shop and climbed the hill toward the Meridian Tower. Each step was a thought he had to finish before taking the next. Dust hung in sunlight like gold caught considering its options. He passed a cat in mid-leap between two barrels, an acrobat pinned by tenderness. He set the cat on a lid and stroked its fur. It purred, a sound that somehow survived the pause, as if cats answer to a different calendar. At the tower door, the keeper of the bell stood with his hands on the rope. His fingers were cords. His face was the color of weathered parchment. Astor, he said without moving his lips, and yet Astor heard him. How? Astor asked. Time is a river, the keeper said. Even when it freezes, we remember how to swim. They climbed together to the bell room. The bronze mouth was open, tongue a great stone suspended inside. The note it had begun still trembled across the air, a ring without circle. Astor pressed his ear to the bell and closed his eyes. He heard machinery, the small invisible one, the kind that lives under prayer. Beneath the note lay another note, lower, patient. The second hand of the gods, stalled between compassion and decree. Can you set it right? the keeper asked. Aster almost said yes, because men who mend things practice hope as a craft. Instead he said, I can listen. He placed his palm on the bell, feeling the temperature of halted day. Under his skin, memories began to file past, gentle as monks. The morning his mother taught him to read minutes from a shadow on a wall. The afternoon a storm arrived early and everyone forgave the hour. The night he waited for an apology that never came and learned how long a minute can grow when it's alone. The bell translated his life into circles. In the street below, not everyone was still. A girl named Loon, too young to be punctual, too old to be entirely new, walked with a jar of sunlight in her hands. Where had she found it? In the alley behind the bakery, where flour floated like continents and the window held a sunrise from 3 days ago. She had coaxed a little of that light into glass and now moved as if carrying a sleeping animal. When she entered the tower, the bell brightened, as though it recognized something it used to guard. Loon looked at Aster with the polite astonishment of children who have not yet been taught which miracles to ignore. Is it broken? She asked. It's remembering, he said. Remembering what? How to be more than a sound. She nodded as if this were sensible. When I hold the jar, she said, the world has edges again. Aster took the jar, and the paused dust sharpened. The frozen fountain gleamed with the idea of motion. Even his breath returned as a small, obedient tide. Where did you learn that? My grandmother, Loon said. She keeps a garden with no seasons. You can taste August in February if you know which leaf to ask. Aster stood with the jar in one hand and the bell under the other and felt a design emerge between them, the way you can't see a constellation until you let go of the stars' names. Perhaps time was not only the distance between moments, but the conversation between memory and attention. Perhaps the god's clock did not count seconds at all. Perhaps it counted agreements. This happened, we will share its weight. Loon climbed into the bell's mouth and sat where the stone tongue hung. She whispered to it as if to a shy horse. What do you tell it? Aster asked. The quiet parts, she answered. The pieces that fall off laughter and get left on the floor. The keeper of the bell watched them like a man recognizing a story he had once been. Every noon, he said, I pull and the bell speaks, but perhaps it was never my pulling that mattered. Perhaps it waited for the city to be ready to hear. They carried the jar to a narrow window slit that looked east. Dawn lived there perpetually now, a blade of orange caught in stone. Aster unstoppered the glass and poured a thimble of light onto the sill. It did not spill. It grew. The light touched the suspended dust. The dust decided to be air again and moved. The cat below completed its leap and landed with the satisfaction of a solved equation. The fountain fell in a single silver ribbon and became 1,000 drops, each inventing its own small story of gravity and return. But the bell's note still hung, though it trembled with the effort of remembering how to end. What is missing? Aster asked. An apology, said the keeper softly. From whom? The gods, Loon said, as if it were obvious. Aster laughed, and the sound startled him with its depth. Laughter required time. It had to travel, to ripple, to come back wearing the face of relief. How does a god apologize? He asked. By listening, Loon said. By counting what we count. Aster thought of the little measures, how bakers trust dawn more than calendars, How lovers measure evenings not by hours but by the length of a conversation after the last candle. How the dying measure time in hands held, in breaths borrowed from other rooms. He put his hand back on the bell. "Listen," he whispered to whatever watched the world from beyond roofs and stars. "We have kept your hours. Keep our moments." For a long span, too graceful to be called a pause, nothing happened. Then the note inside the note moved, a fraction of a thought. Astor felt the change like a key turning in a lock he had been born with. The bell finished its breath. Noon arrived without striking. It arrived like a tide finally touching the shore it always meant to find. Shadows remembered where to fall. Somewhere a baker burned the first tray and laughed because the second would be perfect. Somewhere a woman found her mother's ring in the pocket of a coat she had not worn since grief began. Somewhere a boy forgave a clock for telling the truth too quickly. Astor checked a pendulum and it swung. Forward, back. A kindness offered in two directions. Loon held up the empty jar and grinned. "We can fill it again," she said. "With what?" asked the keeper. "With whatever doesn't know its time yet." Astor turned once more to the bell, pressed his forehead to the bronze, and thanked it for remembering how to end. He did not ask why the god's clock had halted. He suspected the answer was a language that required too much sky. He looked east through the narrow slit. There, on the horizon, something faint ticked, too large to be a machine, too careful to be a star. It was not the end of the story. It was the hinge.
Astor woke to the sound of a clock that wasn't there. Each tick was distant, then close, like something breathing through walls made of memory. The city was moving again, but not forward. It was rotating through moments like a compass spinning in magnetic storm. People walked in reverse through streets that looked younger than their footprints. Flowers unbloomed with grace. Rain lifted itself back into clouds, and shadows returned to their lamps as if apologizing for wandering. Astor stood on his balcony and saw a staircase where the street had been. It rose through the air like a ribbon of stone, curving toward the sky that had forgotten how to stay still. He knew where it led, to the place where time was built. At its base waited Loon, the child who carried light in a jar. This time she held nothing. Her hands were empty, but her eyes held dawn like a secret that had been told too early. "The stairs weren't here yesterday," Astor said. "They were," she replied. "You just hadn't remembered them yet." The first step was made of mourning. The second was a dream he had once forgotten. Each step after that was older than the last. By the 10th, Astor was walking through his own childhood. The sound of a clock his father never finished. The smell of sunlight on brass. The voice of a woman counting backwards from dusk. Halfway up, they met a man carrying an hourglass with no sand. He wore robes of silver threads, each thread vibrating as if it remembered a different century. He spoke like a tide reading itself. "I am Crony, the architect of the clock you heard in your sleep." Astor bowed. "Why has it stopped?" Crony smiled. "Because we built time to measure what the gods feared most, ending. But nothing in the sky ends. So the machine grew lonely."
He turned the empty hourglass. The air inside shifted colors like breath. "When men pray for tomorrow," he said, "they feed it hope. When they regret yesterday, they feed it memory. But no one feeds it now. That's why it starved." The staircase narrowed as they climbed. Wind howled around them like a choir of unborn hours. Below, the city twisted through its own reflections. Streets mirroring streets, days folding over themselves like pages written twice. Loon held Astor's hand. "Do you hear it?" she asked. He listened. Beneath the wind was a heartbeat too slow to belong to flesh. It was the sound of a clock relearning courage. At the summit stood a door with no frame, made of nothing but shadows cast by light that did not exist yet. Crony knelt and pressed his hourglass against it. The door breathed once and opened. Inside was a room without walls, a sky of floating mechanisms, each one a memory given shape. Clocks of crystal, of rain, of heartbeat, of dream. In the center hung a colossal wheel, each tooth engraved with a moment someone had loved and forgotten. Loon walked to the wheel and touched one of its edges. Immediately she saw 1,000 summers unfurl at once. Laughter, storms, ashes, rebirth. Her hair lifted as if time were whispering through it. "This is beautiful," she said. Crony answered, "It was never meant to be." Aster stood beneath the wheel. Its shadow fell on him like the hand of a sleeping giant. He understood now why the god's clock had stopped. It had heard the world's cry for pause, for a single moment where grief did not follow joy so quickly. He spoke softly to the machine. "You stopped to be kind." The wheel answered with light. It turned once, not forward, not back, but sideways into a direction where memory and future were the same. And for that instant the whole world exhaled. Loon laughed quietly. Her voice was the sound of a clock beginning again, not because it must, but because it wanted to.
The great wheel turned once and then fell still. The light it shed faded into a trembling dusk, and the walls of the room began to breathe. Aster, Loon, and Crony stood within the silence, watching as the air itself gathered shape. From the center of the chamber rose a vast figure, not of flesh, but of memory. Its body was woven from time undone. Its skin shimmered with shifting ages, and within its chest burned a heart of glass that beat once a century. Crony knelt. "He is Somnian," he whispered, "the sleeper of hours, the god who dreamt the first morning." The god's eyes remained closed, yet every blink of his unseen lids changed the air around them. Newborn clouds drifted, rivers reversed, and mountains aged by minutes. Aster felt the hum of his own heartbeat syncing with the god's. He saw flashes behind his eyes, fragments of things that had not yet happened. The city drowned in light, Loon walking through seasons that bled into one another, clocks melting into song. "He is still dreaming," said Loon softly. Crony nodded. "And as long as he sleeps, time obeys the dream." "But if he wakes?" Aster asked. "Then time ends," Crony said. "For when the dreamer opens his eyes, the story stops needing to be told." Aster looked again at Somnian. The god's expression was peaceful, but beneath it lay exhaustion, the kind only immortals could know. They walked along the curve of the chamber, tracing the faint mechanisms etched into its surface. Each symbol represented a second, a single breath of existence. Aster realized with awe that time itself was written here, spiraling endlessly around the god's resting form. Loon reached out and touched one of the carvings. It pulsed beneath her fingers, warm, alive. Suddenly she gasped, "I saw the first sunrise."
Aster steadied her. "What did it say?" She hesitated. It wasn't saying. It was listening. Crony's gaze darkened. "The symbols are aware of us. The god's dream knows when it's being watched." The floor beneath them rippled like water. They found themselves standing in a landscape of living moments. Vast fields of hours, each shimmering like wheat under invisible wind. Above them hung constellations made of unspent seconds, glowing faintly like waiting promises. Loon pointed to one star dimmer than the rest. "That one's dying," she said. Crony frowned. "That is the hour he forgot, the moment he fell asleep." Aster stepped forward. "Can we reach it?" "The only way to wake a god," Crony replied, "is to remind him what he left unfinished." The ground rose into steps of light. Each one they climbed showed a reflection of their faces, their pasts, their might-have-beens. Aster saw himself as a child, counting seconds in candlelight, then older, watching a clock break and choosing not to fix it because he feared what it might reveal. At the top stood a single mirror of water, perfectly still. Within it shimmered the sleeping god's reflection, and within that reflection, a smaller version of the same mirror, infinitely repeating. Loon whispered, "It's a loop." Crony smiled sadly. "Yes, the gods dream in circles. Only mortals dare to dream in lines." Aster knelt beside the mirror and spoke, not to the god, but to the silence inside him. "Somnian," he said, "you gave us time to feel, not to fear. You built the clock so we could measure love, not loss." The water trembled. The constellations above them flickered like eyelids about to open. Loon leaned close and whispered something no one else could hear. A child's secret, small enough to slip between eternities. The god exhaled. The air around them rippled, and for the briefest instant, all of creation blinked.
Then stillness returned, deeper, calmer, as if the universe had just taken a slow breath for the first time. Crony smiled. He heard us, but he chose to keep dreaming. Aster nodded. Then the world keeps spinning, and somewhere far beyond the visible sky, the clock of the gods turned again, its hands tracing not minutes, but mercy. When Aster and Loon descended from the chamber of Somnian, the world was not as they had left it. The city shimmered like a mirage seen through rain, the past and future stacked together like reflections in uneven glass. A child was born and grown within the same breath. A candle burned backward, then forward, undecided. People laughed at jokes they hadn't heard yet, and cried over losses that had not occurred. Crony stood beside the tower's edge, watching the clock hands tremble between directions. "Time is remembering itself," he said. "But memory is a dangerous clock. It ticks both ways." In the streets, voices spoke half-formed sentences that finished in another moment. Aster walked among them, feeling déjà vu stretch like an echo turned inside out. Every face seemed familiar, though he could not recall why. Loon tugged his sleeve. "Look!" At the center of the square stood a mirror pool. Its surface showed not their reflections, but their tomorrows. He saw himself older, standing in the same place, whispering words to someone unseen. He saw Loon's jar of light, glowing brighter than before, and behind them both, the shadow of a great clock turning without sound. "It's showing us what's already waiting," Loon said quietly. Crony knelt beside the pool. "This is the river of continuation," he murmured.
When the gods grew weary of eternity, they built this place so that even time could remember its own promise, that no moment, once loved, truly ends. He dipped his hand into the reflection. Ripples spread, and in each, a possible future bloomed. A city rebuilt from silence, a world where hours grew like flowers instead of walls. Aster watched the images shift and fade. "Why does it hurt to look?" "Because even beauty must pass," Crony replied. "And we were never meant to watch it leave twice." A storm gathered over the tower, but it was not made of clouds. It was made of lost days, of yesterdays forgotten by those who no longer wish to remember. The sky darkened with fragments of unspoken words and unfinished dawns. The people below reached upward, catching fragments of their own lives. A wedding that never happened, a song never sung, a promise left unsent. Each memory glowed briefly, then dissolved into the air. Loon turned to Aster. "Are we supposed to save them?" "No," he said. "We're supposed to listen." The storm was not falling. It was speaking, and in its thousand voices, Aster heard the truth. The gods had not created time to measure life. They had created it so that even loss could be found again. As the storm calmed, a figure appeared within the clock's shadow, luminous, shifting, neither man nor woman, neither young nor old. Its eyes were filled with dawns that had not yet been born. Crony fell to one knee. "The memory of tomorrow," he whispered. "The spirit of what has not yet happened." The being looked at Aster and Loon. "You have turned the clock with your understanding," it said. "But understanding alone cannot keep the world alive."
Aster bowed his head. "Then what can?" "Forgetfulness," the being said softly. "To dream tomorrow, you must forgive today." The being reached out and touched the tower. Instantly, the bells began to hum. Not in unison, but like 1,000 hearts learning a single rhythm. Shadows unknotted, and sunlight moved again. But slower, gentler, aware. People blinked and found themselves breathing with the same time again. Children laughed at the return of day. The fountain flowed without pause. Aster turned to Loon. "What did it mean to forgive today?" She smiled. "Maybe it means to stop holding time accountable for our wounds." They looked up. The great clock of the gods glowed faintly above the clouds. One of its hands missing, the other pulsing softly with new light. Tomorrow was still unwritten, but for the first time it was listening. Night had fallen, but it was not dark. The sky shone with dust and memory, constellations bending like pages in a book half remembered by the world. Loon looked up and saw the stars moving slowly against their own histories. "They're drifting back," she whispered. Crony nodded. "The sky is returning to its beginning. Every 1,000 ages, the stars forget where they belong, and the gods gather them again inside the hourglass of heaven." Aster lifted his gaze. At the zenith, between two dying moons, hung a shape made of glass and night, an hourglass the size of a world, its sands made of falling starlight. And for the first time since the daytime stopped, Aster heard the sky breathe. They climbed beyond the tower, past the highest wind and into the realm where gravity forgot to speak. The path was woven of meteor threads and frozen songs of comets. When they reached the threshold, Crony paused. "This place is older than silence. If we step through, we will see how the gods measure forever." Loon took his hand. "I want to know what forever sounds like." A door of pure light opened without being asked. They entered.
Inside was the hourglass, vast, rotating slowly in a void that glowed like breath caught between stars. Its upper chamber was filled with brilliant dust, its lower one with shadows that flickered like thoughts not yet believed. Crony spoke softly, as if afraid to wake the constellations. "These are the forgotten stars, the ones that burned so brightly they erased their own memories. When a star forgets its light, the gods place its ashes here, so that its story may continue as sand." Loon peered into the lower half of the glass. "It's beautiful," she said, "but why does it make me sad?" "Because," Crony answered, "every light you see there was once someone's morning." Aster closed his eyes and listened. Each grain of sand sang a different note, a heartbeat, a sunrise, a goodbye. Together, they formed a song that felt older than hope and younger than grief. As they watched, the hourglass began to turn on its own. The sands reversed their fall. The forgotten stars climbed back toward the heavens. The sky brightened with memories returning home. Nebulas blossomed like wounds turning into flowers. Every grain of stardust became a forgiven moment. But Aster noticed something. The hourglass was cracking. From its base rose a fracture of light so bright it burned truth into color. "What's happening?" Loon cried. Crony stared in wonder. "The hourglass is remembering us." From the crack emerged shapes, ghosts of seconds that had never been lived. They floated around the three travelers like curious children born from tomorrow's dreams. One of them touched Astor's hand, and in that touch he saw his entire life played in reverse, from the moment he stood beneath the sky to the day his mother taught him to count raindrops instead of seconds. He wept, not for sadness, but for the grace of seeing every moment twice.
Crony knelt and gathered a handful of sand in his palm. "The gods will wake soon," he said. "When they see that their clock has learned to love, they will let it run again." The sands rose one final time, pouring upward into the night. Every forgotten star rekindled itself, and the sky became a map of forgiveness. Astor looked at Loon. Her jar of light was full again, but different now. It glowed not with flame, but with quiet understanding. "What do we do now?" she asked. "We wait for the hour that has never been," he replied. Below them, the city of clocks beat in unison once more. Above them, the hourglass turned slowly, its crack mending with light. For a moment long enough to be eternity, the universe stood between two ticks and smiled. The hourglass hung above the world, its crack now healed, its light a soft breath over the sky. Below, the city of clocks glimmered like a constellation fallen to earth. Astor stood at the meridian tower once more. The hands of every clock in the city were aligned to the same point. Not noon, not midnight, but something between. An hour the world had never spoken. Loon placed her jar on the stone ledge. It was empty now, emptied not of light, but of need. She smiled quietly. "I think it's time," she said. Crony looked toward the heavens. Yes, for the clock to remember why it was made. The great bell began to hum. Its tone was different now, less a sound than a feeling that filled the bones. All around the city, people stopped where they stood, listening as if the sky itself had spoken their names.
The bells of the harbor answered, then the bells of the mountain chapel, and even those of ships still dreaming in the harbor. The entire world was ringing, but not in unison, in conversation. Each bell told its story of time, and the others listened. Astor closed his eyes. He could feel it, the last tick approaching, not as an ending, but as a breath exhaled by creation itself. Above them, the hourglass of the heavens began to turn one final time. From its upper chamber fell not sand, but light, pure and slow as mercy. Each grain landed upon the earth and became something new. A leaf, a word, a memory finally understood. Loon caught one in her palm and held it close. "It's warm," she said. "It feels like tomorrow." Crony smiled. "That is tomorrow. The first one the gods did not create, the first one we earned." Then the sky deepened. The stars grew still. Every sound folded inward until there was only the soft beat of the universe, a pulse that belonged to no god and no machine. Astor spoke, his voice barely a breath. "What happens when the last tick comes?" Crony answered, "Then time will sleep and dream of us." Loon looked at the jar. It began to fill on its own, not with light, but with reflections, faces of those who had ever waited, ever forgiven, ever loved without knowing why. The final tick came like a heartbeat heard through infinite distance. The world did not end. It exhaled. The sea turned to glass for a moment, the mountains to echo, the wind to song. And through it all, the clock of the gods spoke one last time. "Remember to forget nothing that was loved." Then the hands stopped, not broken but complete. Astor stood beneath the silent bell. Loon leaned against him, her eyes half closed. Crony watched the sky quietly rebuild itself with stars new and old. Somewhere beyond sight, Somnian, the sleeping god of hours, smiled within his dream. He would not wake again, for there was nothing left to measure.
Time did not begin again, continued but not as a command, as a gift. The city breathed once more, and in that breath was every beginning that had ever hoped to be born. And the end of the clock of the gods, when time stopped,